Cheers, my sleepy friends. This is SleepyVlog number 54. I'm not even sure if I have that much to say. I'm really disorganized tonight, so instead I'm looking at my beard, which needs some trimming here and there. I was reminded that I've been meaning to make more sleepy vlogs because Comic Uno's Geeky Awards, in them I got nominated for Best Comic Book Vlogger, which is great. I don't encourage anyone to vote for me just because. Do whatever you want to do. Vote for the best person if you vote. I certainly don't ever think about any of this as having to do with awards or getting attention, in a sense. But I do love Comic Uno because she puts out lots of great material. And to me, she's kind of a great role model. I need role models in my mind of women liking comic books and women liking things like I do as I try to raise my daughter to be like me. I don't want to feel like I'm doing something bad by bringing her into all these geeky things. And I did grow up, when I grew up, I did not know girls or women who like comic books. I tried to convince some girlfriends in college to like comic books. It never really went anywhere. I even had a long-distance relationship with one who because it was long before the internet and phone calls seemed very expensive back then. So we wrote endless letters to each other, and I used to write letters on the back of Xeroxed copies of Spirit pages by Will Eisner, or even Daredevil pages by Frank Miller. I'm not sure why I thought that would change her or make her a comic book fan. But that's what I thought was the coolest thing back then. But anyway, I feel that your presence, you women comic book vloggers out there, like Reader 1717 and La Raza and Audrey from the First Family of Comics, and Nerdy Nat and Sarah Smash, who may not be with us anymore, and newer people that I've discovered, Holy Batgirl, Living Dead Girl 201. I know there's others that I'm now missing. Chloe, who's half a fat stack of comics. And others. It's really important to have men and women and people of all walks of life as part of a community like this. And it just means a lot to me, and it makes me feel better about, sucking my daughter into all of this. And I feel like comics have been doing a good job lately of bringing women in as characters and creators, particularly women artists. It feels like the women writers are still underrepresented. But a lot of good women artists, and I think a lot more to come. And I think that's why you get these creeps who make T-shirts about not wanting women in fandom, or rape threats to people who critique comics from a woman's point of view. These are the last gasp, the people who sense that, who really cared about this all male territory, the small number who really cared about that, who have kind of a last gasp attempt at scaring people away or just lashing out in ugly ways. And I really hope that goes away, and I really hope it doesn't effectively drive any women away. Because I just think it's a richer experience for everybody. And comics have grown up, and part of growing up is not having the boys' side of the room and the girls' side of the room and stuff. I mean, that is literally kindergarten stuff, because somewhere during the year of kindergarten that my daughter's been in, the boys and girls have separated. They used to play together a lot more in preschool. And probably by fifth and sixth grade, they'll be wanting to play together again. So let's all be grown-ups about that. One exciting thing with my daughter, I don't have the two comics here with me. I'm not sure where we put them. Is her love for this Silver Surfer comic that Dan Slott and Michael Allred and Laura Allred are doing together. It's the first comic book where she's like looked at the art over and over again and examined what's going on and had deep discussions with me. And one of the great things about it for her and for us reading it together is that the Silver Surfer has this female companion. And I think this is a really great comic book for kids. They probably don't want to advertise it that way or maybe they don't think of it that way, but it would theoretically drive the adult readers away from it. But if you have kids and you want to read comic books with them, I definitely would check that out. My daughter has been ravaging the first two issues of it. Ravaging, I mean, crinkling up the paper and folding and bending it, and I just have to live with that, which makes me particularly sad because the Michael Allred art is so beautiful. I guess I should get 2 copies. It reminds me of like The Wizard of Oz and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Doctor Who, of course, and just kind of magical things rather than real science fiction. But a hell of a lot of fun, if you take that childlike view of it. I think this is a comic book. Well, this is a comic book for my daughter anyway, that like is the one that really lights that comic book fire in her head. Although she's already been into comic books, of course, drawing her own and reading them with me. But we definitely hit a new level with the Silver Surfer. We also liked a lot. I read the first issue of Ms. Marvel with her. I think I've talked about that before. But after reading the second issue on my own, I decided not to read that with her because as a almost 6-year-old, ending on a cliffhanger where someone has been shot and might be dying, although I, of course, know they're not going to die, is too intense for her. But I think Ms. Marvel is an example of a comic book that's being written by a woman who is a really good writer, who's doing a really fantastic job on the writing of that. My daughter and I read a lot of digital comic books, and as most of you may have heard, there was a big changeover in the way Comixology works in that you can no longer buy in-app, as they call it, on Apple devices anyway, because Amazon bought Comixology and doesn't want to share the money with Apple. And that really, my daughter and I read a lot of comics digitally, and that has really changed things because you really cannot quickly find an issue or buy a new issue. For instance, we were going to get, what was it? Oh, we were going to get Scooby-Doo Team Up. And I was on the app, and I had to, here's what the app looks like now, and I had to search for it. There's your search thing, and I searched for Scooby-Doo Team Up, and I found it in the app after searching for it. You have to know what you're looking for. You can no longer just browse. I found it, and I pressed wish list because you can't buy it on the app. And then I went over to the Comixology website. Let's see, how do we get to the website? Oh. Sorry, excuse me. I'm very disorganized here. I went over to the Comixology website. There's the Comixology website on the browser. And I couldn't find my wish list. Oh, I couldn't find my wish list at first. I found my wish list. And then what I had just added to my wish list wasn't there. And it's very slow to load. The Comixology website is just not very efficient. It's still not on my. So things I put on my wish list are there. Some of them, that's my wish list, but the Scooby-Doo team up is not there. So then I searched on the website for the Scooby-Doo team up, and I just came up with Scooby-Doo comics, but not the Scooby-Doo team up. Team up is with Batman or Batman related characters, because this issue was a team up with the Teen Titans. The Teen Titans Go version of the Teen Titans. But anyway, so I couldn't find it on their website because their search on their website, I didn't spell it exactly right. Like I didn't put a dash between Scooby and Doo, I think. Or maybe I did put a dash between Scooby and Doo. It showed me some Scooby-Doo comics, but not the Scooby-Doo team up. So then I had to go and I downloaded their DC Comixology app, the DC branded app, which you can still do in-app purchases in. And I went through that and bought the Scooby-Doo team up. So I had to go through all these steps to do this impulse buy so my daughter and I could read Scooby-Doo team up. And since then I haven't bought anything on Comixology. And I probably will, use the DC app and maybe the Marvel app, and I think maybe there's an Image app. But in the 3 years or 2.5 years that I've had an iPad, I've discovered a lot of comics, particularly kids comics, through the Comixology app, through browsing on it, like Smurfs comics, which is by Paper Cuts. That's the name of the company. They don't have their own branded app the way DC does. So I feel that, first of all, most people are not going to go through all the stuff I went through just to get Scooby-Doo team up. And, most casual users of the iPad who might try out Comixology. And even people like me are not going to discover things by small companies on the Comixology app anymore. And I think that's, from the larger view of, even if you don't care at all about digital comic books, the nice thing about Comixology and stuff like that is it gave a platform for comics that maybe can't even get into many comic book stores or get known by most of us. And I think they have effectively killed themselves on the Apple-type devices. Because Amazon is gambling that everyone will switch to their devices or at least not use Apple and use Android devices. So I think that's a loss. I think that the promise of digital comics to people who just love the art of comics is that it would open up the doors for more different kinds of creative groups to have a newsstand where they can show their comics off. I do think this leaves a lot of room for someone else to come along and take Comixology's place in the Apple ecosystem. And Apple is supposedly trying to promote more reading comic books on iBooks, but iBooks is a terrible platform for reading digital comics because it doesn't allow you to zoom on panels at all. In fact, it tries to show you 2 pages at once. So, and also, people saying it's foolish to get digital comics because you probably won't be able to access those comics. This already shows that. I mean, these comics are still there on Comixology, but it might be that Comixology is eventually going to be killed by Amazon. And even if they aren't, if you're using mostly your iPad, if some other platform comes along that you prefer to read your comics on, the comics that you bought through Comixology, you probably just won't ever look at. You'll forget they were there. Most of the digital comics I'm reading for myself now are just on the Marvel Unlimited app. So all these like Dynamite comics that I bought on the Comixology app and stuff I'll probably never revisit those. I'll probably forget that I ever had them after a while. So as someone who kind of was excited over digital comics, I'm feeling a little bit down on them at the moment. But sad, because I think that the more they're easy to use, the more they're going to draw new readers in, and the more they're going to be a little extra stream of income for the comic book companies. So I personally think that what Amazon has done to Comixology is perhaps a small disaster for the comic book publishing industry. Yeah, people probably are tired of me talking about digital comics too often. I guess I have one more thought before I go, which is, well, I finally got a hold of digitally the Free Comic Book Day DC Comic Futures End, and it was kind of fun to read, and I'm kind of tempted to, maybe if there's a big sale at one of my comic book shops, to pick up a bunch of issues of it. And I have been following Batman Eternal. And in the previous issue, there were some characters that I didn't know enough about to understand what they were about. In this issue, there's a lot of Catwoman and the Penguin. And yeah, somehow all of those things clicked into to think that DC's kind of turning back the clock pre-New 52, at least in the vibe of DC. Because I used to occasionally pick up DC comics in the period between the late 90s or maybe the early 2000s through up just before the New 52. I'd randomly pick up comics, and they just seemed sort of convoluted and just too much into their long-running storyline, so I didn't know who was who and what was what. And so the New 52, for me, because I wasn't keeping track of what was going on in DC, was a huge relief and allowed me to really get into a lot of DC characters. But Batman Eternal and Future's End, and I'm guessing the World's End that they're going to be doing later, are, to me, going back to adding these layers of complication and assuming you know about these huge number of characters, and assuming that Batman, in the case of Batman Eternal, and just all the other people in the DC universe have these long histories with each other. And so I feel like they're undoing the value of the New 52. They didn't do the New 52 that well to begin with, but they did it well enough that someone like me could, who really hadn't paid much attention to DC since the very early 90s, could get back into it. And I know that for the people who had been paying a lot of attention to DC during the aughts, during the 2000s, there was all this richness lost. But this feeling of these huge tapestries layered with characters, which is kind of a cool thing, is also just kind of a frustrating thing. And I feel like I've been watching DC dig itself into a hole in the past few years. It feels like there's a lot of good stuff going on at Marvel. I'm not going to pay $4 for comic books unless I'm sure they're brilliant. So most of those Marvel ones I will read later in trades or on the app. But it does seem like editorially Marvel is handling things quite well now, from what I hear, like The Punisher and Magneto. I've read the first issues of both of those digitally. People gave me the codes, and I look forward to reading more of that. Moon Knight might be really good. The Avengers and the X-Men are still lost to me, and still maybe like what I'm complaining about, those layers of complexity and sort of that sense of it's so convoluted, who cares? But the Future's End, that goes from a further future to 5 years in our future. I mean, that alone is such a complicated idea. But that it's going to feature just these tons of DC characters as as if they have all this history that they don't have as far as a reader of the New 52 knows. I guess they just can't stay away from that mode of this enormous layer cake of superheroes and characters that they have. I mean, it is a cool thing. It is a cool thing that DC's added, they've got all the Wildstorm characters, and before that they've got the Charlton characters, and they've got various other characters they've bought up over the years that they just pile into their universe. Blue Beetle, where is that, Charlton? I think so. He was in the Future's End prologue that I read. So anyway, yeah. I don't know why, but since the New 52, I want to love DC. I do. There's just something nice about the DC characters that I hated, when I was a Marvel fanatic in the 70s and 80s. But, yeah. But Image, as I've said many times before, Image is what really has my attention. I feel like I'm about to fall asleep on my microphone. What a nice pillow. So I'm going to leave it at that for now. For those of you who've hung out with me, thanks very much. Talk to you later.